So welcome to this Cybersecurity Magazine podcast. I'm Philippa Jefferies, and I also have with me Hans Christian Rudolph as normal. And today we are talking with Tom Madsen. Tom has written quite a few articles with us before and has recently joined us as an editorial board member of Cybersecurity Magazine. So Tom, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Before we start with what we want to talk to you most about today, would you like perhaps to introduce yourself a little and your background in security?
Yes, as you so kindly mentioned, my name is Tom. I've been working with cybersecurity since '99, on and off, mostly on. I have a background that worked within the United Nations, IT retailers, pen testing companies, GRC, and now I am a cybersecurity manager with Accenture, focusing on cybersecurity on clouds, OT, IT, and GRC, governance, risk, and compliance. Because governance, as I see it, is going to be a business differentiator in the coming years. With the complex environment and regulatory environments we see around the world only increasing, governance is going to become increasingly important to most companies.
Yeah, and Tom, actually for our first podcast, you suggested the topic of today's discussion, which is going to be around how IT and OT are growing together. What was your motivation behind that? Why do you feel that's an important topic right now?
We have seen, mostly in the news, to be fair, that many companies have seen their operational technology. And I should probably define OT, because operational technology, I use that as like a blanket term for operational, for SCADA, for ICS. When I say OT, I mean all of those. There are various definitions, but for this discussion, OT covers everything. And operational technology, we've seen the Florida, the water plant company that got attacked. We have seen in Germany, steel mills have been attacked, and because of the increasing importance both for businesses of the OT, because if the OT doesn't work or goes down or is broken or anything like that, they start losing a lot of money, a lot of money. And because OT and IT it's not slowly becoming merged anymore, it's increasing in tempo. But because it's two different worlds, an engineer within OT has a different view of security and managing the OT environment than the IT environment. For decades, we have been told, patch, make sure everything's up to date. You cannot do that in the OT because many OT environments are maybe decades old and are not built for that whole philosophy of patching. That's slowly changing as well. For instance, Siemens, what they're called, I don't remember all but all of the OT vendors that are selling gizmos, PLCs, and stuff like that have woken up to this new threat that is attacks against their environments. We saw it with the attack against the Iranian nuclear plants, where it was Siemens PLCs that were attacked back in 08, 9, 10. The story is still not being told completely, and that opened a lot of engineers' eyes. They're saying, okay, my OT environments are vulnerable to attacks, and it can have real-world impacts. So all the vendors have slowly started developing their PLCs and all the other gizmos for controlling valves and electricity, water, whatever it is, to be patched and maintained slowly. But it's a process where most of these environments are not ready for this. And it's a capital investment for many companies changing their OT technology, because they can't just take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It has to be a complete technology refresh for many factories. And that's an extremely high expenditure. And in all fairness, if it ain't broke, why fix it? So when IT and OT becomes connected, usually because the OT environment are using the same network, maybe not physically, but the same routing domains and stuff like that, and are talking together. And because IT has been an attack vector for, well, back in the 80s, we saw the first attacks on IT. And because these two environments are now more and more merged, the attackers see, okay, I could encrypt all of the files, but if it's a company that's fairly mature, they have backups and they will possibly, hopefully, be up within 12 to 24 hours and up and running again. But if I can break or steal their OT network and say, give me money or you're not getting your OT network back. Now we're starting to talk, they are losing money in a big way because they can't produce stuff, sell stuff or whatever it is. And because of the geopolitical environment where nation states are fond of one-upmanship against each other, a lot of civilian environments are becoming part of the one-upmanship from nation states that have, let's call it, less regard for the other side of their attacks. So this OT-IT is becoming merged.
And I actually wanna ask specifically on that part. You went already quite deep, and as we can see, this is a huge issue. It's a huge complexity that is behind that. If we step back a little bit and try to understand, with these different domains, these cyber physical systems that have impact on physical objects in the world and can potentially cause physical harm. What is the driver? What is the motivation behind hooking those up with our IT networks, with the public internet? If you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Convenience, so to speak, money saved, because most of the OT gizmos now they're not using proprietary networks anymore. They're all using Ethernet. That means you won't have to have separate networking gizmos for the two networks. You can just have one set of routing and switching and gizmos, because they all talk Ethernet. And because we have all, for the past year and a half, 2 years almost, a lot of people of us have been working from home, and an OT engineer that wants to monitor his or her OT, they will then access the OT network from home, possibly via jump post or logging into to stuff. So because of the IT now talking to the OT, it's also easier for IT and OT to kind of like talk together and use the same technology platform. But it's convenience, and convenience translates into money saved, and money saved puts a smile on the face of the CFO or the board of directors in general. So it's something that has happened, and it has happened too quick for the actual security of the OT environment to keep up with the new threats because of the integration with IT. There are companies out there that have seen that and are helping. Cisco has both gizmos for OT network and monitoring. Nozomi networks can have tools to help it. Palo Alto, the firewall vendor, Trend Micro has. A lot of the vendors that have traditionally been on the IT side have seen, okay, there's a new risk being added to a company's risk and threat profile. We need to help them with that. So a lot of the traditional ones are slowly saying, okay, we need to help companies protect and monitor their OT network. But a lot of them are not that mature yet, especially the traditional vendors. There's probably those of you who have seen the YouTube videos with the Symantec the analyst that disassembled the attack code against the Iranian nuclear network. They didn't know anything about the code for the Siemens PLCs. And it's the same for the other vendors. They need to then orient themselves and become specialized in the specific challenges for the OT networks in order to help them. It's happening now, and it's progressing forward at a fast pace. So that's a good thing. But the maturity on IT is vastly better than it is on the OT right now, although it's happening at a fast clip for most of the vendors now.
And what kind of particular weaknesses does bringing your OT network bring, as opposed to just looking at the IT?
The weaknesses in the, let's say, if you look at the traditional OT network, where it hasn't been patched, it's legacy, so to speak, and they haven't been patched. The Siemens PLCs, for instance, back with the Natanz nuclear plant in Iran, those were old software and firmware versions that were running on those and never been patched. And because the attackers have now opened their eyes to saying, here's an entirely new surface area for me to be malicious and nefarious in. A lot of the weaknesses or the security weaknesses in a lot of different vendors' OT gizmos out there on the internet, and the scanning tools that can go out and say, hey, this gizmo is controlling this gas pipe. What happens if I close this gas pipe? Will it blow up, or what will it do? But traditionally, all of these various weaknesses and security flaws in the OT gizmos have not been publicly available, because the various vendors just kept them within themselves because nobody knew. Don't ask, don't tell, so to speak. But now it's out there on the public, and the scanning tools are able to identify the unpatched, the weak gizmos, especially if they can jump from the IT network to the OT network and just start scanning. And unfortunately, much of it is automated now. Damn it.
Yeah, so. I was going to say, it's kind of, as a lot of it is automated and you kind of bring these IT systems and OT systems together, does that make that situation better or worse? Or is it just different?
It's pretty much, well, that depends on which. For the OT engineer, it's worse. For the IT engineer, because they now are now able to monitor and see into an area that they have never been able to monitor before. So for the OT, it's an increased risk/threat. As for the IT, it's better because now they have more complete monitoring across the entire network. And then the OT and the IT guys have to kind of talk together. And it's also two different languages. It's like back in the early 2000s and the 90s, where IT spoke one language, business spoke another, and they never communicated. It's the same challenge now, where IT and OT needs to find a joint language and make sure they understand one another. And that's also becoming much better now with for instance, with the everything running on Ethernet. Hey, when we're talking Ethernet, all of us. So that's a good foundation. But the OT guys will say, we need to patch the entire OT network, and then he will completely pale and think about what happens to production if the patching process fails. Because he's responsible for the OT network, and if the OT is going down, then there's no water to the populace or electricity, or our products won't be produced. So it's a risk assessment. Well, what happens if we do? Well, we will have this risk if we don't. Then it's up on the old school, wait, see. How do we want to handle this?
And that's actually a good point. Like you mentioned patching as one of these prime examples where it's not just, just follow the best practice that has been established for years in IT, just patch as soon as possible. But I imagine there are at least some general security best practices or, let's say, approaches that translate to OT as well. How do you see that? Which security approaches would also be helpful in the OT domain, and which just do not translate?
We've been talking about segmentation of the networks for many years, and microsegmentations now in the virtual world, and segment the OT network out on a separate subnet by itself, and then firewall that connection between the IT network and the OT network, and say only traffic that are relevant for the OT network is allowed through that firewall, and then monitor what happens on that firewall through it. And that's Cisco has firewalls that can help with the OT networks. Palo Alto has as well. I'm sure other firewalls on Checkpoint, Fortinet, whoever it is, probably have something similar. But controlling the traffic that's allowed in and out of the OT network from that segment is and then monitor the traffic. That's the only way to be fairly secure. Although there are ways of, then are there holes in the firewall because we haven't patched that one? That's another thing. That there are so many moving parts that you have to juggle and make sure to maintain that the attackers only have to we as defenders have to find all the weaknesses. The attacker only has to find one. That puts the advantage squarely on the attacker side, unfortunately. But that's the reality of the threat out there. But segmenting out the OT network and controlling and firewalling that traffic, and for instance, whitelist IP addresses, and only these stations are allowed to communicate with the OT network. And that can be a challenge as well if you don't know who is talking to the OT network, and if people are accessing the OT network remotely, or the OT vendor is sometimes in there and maintaining and monitoring, then it's a third party that has to go through even more balls to juggle. But there are ways of doing it, and there are also certifications out there that can help both IT and OT engineers securing their networks. SANS has a certification. What I seem to remember another vendor as well, but there are certifications. There are not that many books out there yet because it's still new, and not that many people are in that. What's the word? In that area between OT and IT, where you have to translate and secure OT networks and IT networks, and who can do what. I hope there are people out there who are already writing these books. I would like to read them. So if someone are watching and have the skills, please share with us.
Last month on our podcast, we were talking a lot about policies and standards, looking more at a global perspective. But I was just wondering, is there any work in this area looking at the IT/OT security, kind of standards at all?
Yeah, I know. Well, there are what's it called? It's called 42. There are standards. It's not ISO who has developed this one. It's a subsidiary of ISO. There is a standard out there
It's probably
with a number, just
IEC.
IEC something. I think it's 42 something, without me being sure. But
I seem to recall that one as well. Yep. Yeah.
There is a standard out there, and that standard is part of at least the SANS certification. I don't have that one yet, but it's a fairly elaborate standard, and because it's a global standard, it's one size fits all is not the right word, because there are some really, really good content in there on securing OT networks. But it's you have to still be aware that there can be different regulations around the world, local compliance laws and stuff like that. So even though you have that standard, you can buy it from IEC and start reading it. It's fairly heavy, but the content is really, really good. So I highly recommend that. Yeah, IEC something.
We can put that in the show notes for people interested.
Yeah, I think if you look for ICS security standards on Google, it'll be one of the first 2 or 3 results. So,
if a company was looking to develop their security around the fact that their IT and OT systems are starting to grow together, is starting at that standard and looking at that a place to start, do you think?
Yeah, it is. Especially given that if the IT guys know nothing about OT, then they should read this standard. And the OT guys who may know a little bit about security but are mainly concerned with making sure everything's running, they should read that as well, and then talk about if they haven't already integrated the OT IT and they want to do it, don't just do it. Do it in a controlled fashion.
Sure.
Make sure that you have done your homework, and don't just look at the convenience and the money saved, because you might significantly increase the risk to a level where the money saved might not be worth it. So make sure you approach the project with open eyes.
Yeah, and I guess that's the future, right? More and more combined IT/OT systems.
Yeah, it is the future. There's no doubt about it. And slowly, OT will become more like IT, although the gizmos are different. But the patching and the maintenance will become easier, especially as the various companies that are using OT are doing technology refresh to newer platforms. And I would highly recommend that when they're talking about technology refresh, then they talk with whatever vendor they're using and making sure that the vendor supports security patching the various gizmos. Or wait until they can, or shift vendors, whatever makes sense in the specific context.
Yeah, I guess it's all very context driven, right? Because OT systems, like you say, very well, IT systems as well.
It's always about the money. Whether it's being voiced openly or not, money is always a factor in a decision process, whether you're a company, a private person, or it's an internal project. So.
And what do you hope to see, I guess, as we move forward, kind of combining these 2 big systems, both with a lot of security issues? There's a lot that you've discussed and like some of the ways we can improve the security there, but just what are your hopes for developing the security of
I sincerely hope that the traditional security vendors continue their focus on making sure they can expand their services to the OT network as well. I have no doubt in my mind they will continue doing that. But the OT vendors that are producing these gizmos and the monitoring tools and stuff like that should also look to IT, both to make it easier for the traditional vendors to integrate in, but also to make sure that the IT systems can talk to them. For instance, using Ethernet or TCP/IP for the communication, so that everything can see one another in the right context, of course. But that integration it's on its way. That's what I'm seeing out there, and I can only hope that they continue the work. Of course, OT has a longer path because it's a completely different platform for many of them that they have to upgrade or switch to new technologies. But it's on its way. So
Yeah, I guess.
Fantastic. Sorry, Karen.
Sorry. Yeah, I guess Tom, you're right. I get what you wouldn't want to have is, the OT vendors rolling their own solutions, their own security frameworks, but really, take what is already there, see what they can adopt and incorporate, and then, learn from what IT has already done many years
exactly.
ago.
And the OT vendors have focused on producing the gizmos and the stuff that can run all these various OT networks. They don't know it necessarily. Some of them do about security, whereas the traditional security companies, that's their bread and butter. They haven't done anything but that, and just expanding their skills to OT, of course, requires some new learning. But it's an easier part for them to expand into OT than for OT to learn security from the bottom up. So that's a very good point, Hans.
Yeah, and that's actually a fantastic way to end there, I think. Good message for OT and IT to go ahead. Tom, thank you so much for being with us and for taking the time. And maybe, if I may, just one last thing. Tom, you mentioned, learning from each other, security awareness, whether you work in IT or OT, that is crucial. And in our next installment of the podcast, we are going to talk about exactly that. Until then, take care, everyone.